Your Majesties. Good evening, Windsor.
The Queen's final request was meant to unite her family. Instead, it tore them apart. A single document sealed in tradition, bound by secrecy, and whispered about behind palace walls would become the spark that lit a fire under the already cracking foundation of the British monarchy. It wasn't just a will, it was a message. And Prince William, he knew it had to be heard, no matter the cost. When the Queen passed, the world mourned a woman who held a nation together through wars, crises, and scandals. But behind the black veils and public tributes, a quieter storm had already begun. Prince William, once the boy who walked behind his mother's coffin, was now the man standing at the gates of a moral battlefield. His grandmother's dying wish had not been honored, and he wasn't about to let that slide. According to palace insiders, Queen Elizabeth II left behind specific instructions, not just about who would receive what, but about how the monarchy should continue after her. She didn't trust chance. She didn't leave it to tradition. She wrote it all down. But as days turned to weeks, and weeks stretched into months, one disturbing fact became clear. King Charles and Queen Camilla were refusing to act on it. Why? That's the question echoing from Buckingham Palace to the public. What did the Queen request that was so threatening, so inconvenient, that the new monarch and his queen would rather risk public backlash than carry it out? Was it about power, image, or something even deeper, something personal? William, heartbroken and stunned, pleaded with his father. He reminded him that this wasn't about personal gain or royal duty, it was about doing what was right. But Charles, reportedly shaken by the Queen's choices, stood his ground. And Camilla, whose rise from royal mistress to queen had already drawn fire from critics, allegedly feared that the will would undermine her newly cemented place on the throne. As whispers turned to headlines, pressure mounted on William. The Queen's request, sources say, wasn't meant to be hidden. It was meant to guide. So, in a move both bold and controversial, William defied the silent agreement of the royal inner circle. He pushed for the will to be read aloud. To him, this was about legacy, about honoring the woman who had mentored him, prepared him, trusted him. But once the contents were exposed, the true reason behind the resistance became crystal clear. The will didn't just divide possessions. It challenged the order. It shifted power. It sent a signal that Queen Elizabeth saw the future not in titles, but in values. And that future, she believed, rested in the hands of William and Catherine. The backlash was immediate. Camilla felt humiliated. Charles appeared caught between duty and emotion. And as tension bubbled inside the palace, the world watched, wondering, how could a dying queen's final request cause so much pain? But to understand why this final wish feels like betrayal, we need to look back at the Queen's final days. She knew death was near and made sure her legacy would speak louder than her crown. Behind the palace's guarded walls, Queen Elizabeth II began to quietly prepare for the inevitable. The woman who had carried the weight of a nation for 70 years was slipping away. And she knew it. After Prince Philip's death in April 2021, something inside her changed. Her composure never cracked, but those closest to her noticed it. The long silences, the withdrawn glances, the sudden fatigue after even the lightest engagements. The Queen wasn't just grieving her husband, she was fading too. Within months, her presence began to dwindle. Public engagements were cancelled one after another. First, Northern Ireland, then COP26 in Glasgow. And when she was spotted using a walking stick for the first time in public in decades, the nation gasped, but the palace remained silent. That silence, however, couldn't hide the truth. A sprained back forced her to miss the National Service of Remembrance, one of the most sacred moments on the royal calendar. Behind the scenes, doctors were growing concerned. Her health, they admitted, was growing unpredictable. Not catastrophic, but unsteady. And for a monarch who had rarely shown weakness, the image of fragility sent ripples through the Commonwealth. Then came COVID-19. The Queen, ever resilient, tested positive in February 2022. The symptoms were reported as mild, but even she admitted, in rare honesty, that it left her feeling very tired and exhausted. She returned to duty because that's who she was. But something was different now. A heavier toll was settling in, one she could no longer disguise. In March, she missed the annual Commonwealth Day service. In April, she skipped the Royal Maundy service, then Parliament, then her own Platinum Jubilee events. Each cancellation was a signal, but the truth was still locked behind palace doors until it wasn't. Those around her began to whisper. Close aides saw her thinning. Her steps shortened. Her energy, once relentless, now came in short bursts. And then, in a moment of quiet honesty, she turned to her private secretary, Edward Young, and spoke the words no one expected. She knew she was dying. She had known all summer. But she didn't want to alarm the public or her family. She simply wanted to prepare, in the end, for what came after, and for the legacy she would leave behind. Even in her final hours, duty never left her side. On September 6, 2022, just 2 days before her death, she met with incoming Prime Minister Liz Truss. Hours later, her scheduled meetings were cancelled. Doctors had advised rest, and behind closed doors, the Queen issued one last message, a statement of condolence to the victims of a mass stabbing in Canada. It was her final act of public service. The next day, her condition worsened. By the evening of September 8, 2022, the longest reigning monarch in British history took her final breath. At Balmoral Castle, it marked not just the end of a reign, but the end of an era. She was 96. The official cause of death was listed as old age. But behind the curtain, whispers of multiple myeloma, a form of bone marrow cancer, painted a darker truth. She had kept it quiet, just like she had done with everything else that might shake her kingdom's stability. But the true aftershock didn't come from her passing. It came from what she left behind. A sealed will hidden, protected, and fiercely guarded. A document that was never meant to collect dust. A final set of instructions, meticulously crafted to preserve what she believed was the heart of the monarchy. Yet what that will contained would not unite her family. It would divide it. Because the Queen didn't just leave behind memories, she left behind instructions that would threaten the very throne. Not just jewels, not just art. Her will held secrets that could shake the monarchy. It wasn't a simple inventory of possessions, it was a declaration. A silent, calculated act by Queen Elizabeth II that would ignite tension across the highest ranks of Britain's royal bloodline. Hidden behind the ornate gates of Buckingham Palace and locked away in secrecy, the Queen's will became the most guarded document in the kingdom. But when Prince William stepped forward to read it, everything changed. Inside that sealed parchment were not just heirlooms and estates, but choices, sharp, unapologetic choices that drew clear lines between duty and entitlement. Balmoral Castle, the beloved Scottish residence where the Queen took her last breath, was not passed to Charles. It was designated for William. That move alone disrupted centuries of tradition. The Queen knew Balmoral's emotional significance. She also knew who needed to carry its weight into the future. But it didn't stop there. The personal jewels, the ones not tied to the crown estate, but passed down through quiet whispers and royal hands, were distributed with intent. Priceless heirlooms, some dating back to Queen Victoria, were earmarked for Princess Catherine and select royal women. But Camilla? Barely mentioned. The Queen's message was clear without ever writing her name in ink. Tradition would not overwrite legacy. That decision struck like lightning through the palace. What made the will more explosive were the Queen's private notes, handwritten instructions on the future of the monarchy. It wasn't just about who got what. It was about who should lead. She spoke of titles and expectations, of honoring duty over status. The contents suggested a future where William and Catherine weren't just heirs, they were the anchors of the crown's survival. And suddenly, Charles and Camilla found themselves staring at more than just a list of names. They were looking at a redirection of power. The shock was immediate. According to palace insiders, Charles was speechless. Camilla, outraged. Not only was her role minimized, but her perception of her position as queen was now shadowed by a matriarch who had chosen not to validate it. Charles reportedly tried to manage the fallout internally, but it was too late. William had made the will public. It was no longer a private family matter, it was a national reckoning. In a private confrontation, Princess Anne, always the traditionalist, gave her brother a pointed warning. "You're rewriting the Queen's legacy." Her words weren't just protective, they were prophetic. Because this wasn't about material wealth. This was about direction, about a monarch's final attempt to secure the future she believed in, even if it meant bypassing her own son. And then came the moment that silenced the room. Camilla's name was barely mentioned. She was crowned queen. But in the Queen's will, she was nearly invisible. For Camilla, it wasn't just a slight, it was a wound. After decades of being shunned, then tolerated, and finally embraced by the public, she believed her time had come. Standing beside Charles at his coronation, the crown glistening on her head, she had reached the pinnacle of acceptance. But when the Queen's final wishes were unveiled, that illusion shattered. Camilla, it seemed, had never truly been part of the late monarch's vision for the future. What cut the deepest wasn't just the omission, it was the symbolism. The Queen's most prized jewels, many passed through generations of women who shaped the throne, were given not to Camilla, but to Catherine and Princess Anne. The message wasn't lost on anyone. Camilla, despite her title, had not earned a place in that sacred lineage. And it stung. Privately, she expressed outrage over the distribution. The emerald brooch, worn during the Queen's most defining moments, the sapphire set gifted by her father George VI, none of it was hers. The pieces had been deliberately steered away, as if her presence in the royal legacy had been airbrushed out. But what truly sent her into disbelief was the Queen's decision to entrust her prized royal horses to Princess Anne. These were not just animals, they were a symbol of status, of tradition, and of the Queen's deepest passions. Camilla, who had believed she'd earned trust, felt blindsided. To her, it was as if she were being punished again for choices long buried. And while Charles tried to calm the storm behind closed doors, Camilla wasn't backing down. She reportedly challenged the will, questioning its fairness, even suggesting it had been influenced by others in the final days. But the Queen had made sure there was no room for interpretation. Her instructions were specific, ironclad, and deeply personal. In the days that followed, Camilla's quiet conflict with Princess Anne turned colder. The two had always maintained a careful distance, but now that civility crumbled into a silent war. Anne, the no-nonsense guardian of royal tradition, refused to entertain Camilla's discontent. To her, the Queen's word was final, and she had every intention of seeing it honored. Behind palace doors, the tension grew unbearable. Whispers circulated among staff and senior royals alike. Camilla, some said, no longer felt like a queen, but like an outsider playing dress-up in a role that wasn't truly hers. Insiders revealed that she began to question not just her position, but her worth. Despite the public image, Camilla confided to close friends that she feared the Queen had never fully accepted her. That, perhaps, her approval was always more political than personal. The realization left her unsteady, stripped of the quiet confidence she had worked so hard to build. And as the days passed, her resentment simmered, not just at the will, but at the legacy that would never include her the way she once believed. And if Camilla's resentment was hidden behind palace walls, Prince William's loyalty was laid bare. For the world, he could have stayed silent. But William risked it all for his grandmother's honor. In a monarchy built on tradition, silence has always been the safest weapon. But for Prince William, this wasn't the time to stay quiet. The moment the Queen's sealed will fell into his hands, He knew it was more than a document, it was her final stand. And when King Charles hesitated and Camilla pushed back, William made a decision that would shock even the oldest royal advisors. He went public. The move wasn't just rebellious, it was revolutionary. Royals aren't meant to stir the waters, let alone rip the curtain open on private family affairs. But William wasn't acting as just a prince. He was acting as a grandson, a son of Diana, a man who had grown up watching silence devour truth. He stood before the institution and said what no one else dared to. The Queen's voice mattered more than palace politics. And in doing so, he shattered a code of obedience that had survived for generations. His message was raw and piercing. "This is about legacy, not power," he said in a brief but emotional address that spread like wildfire. For a man who had spent his life dodging scandal and carefully shaping his image, this was a risk with everything to lose. But the public saw something different. They saw conviction. They saw a royal not hiding behind protocol, but stepping forward, boldly, to do what was right. In that moment, William became something the monarchy desperately needed: a leader who cared more about doing right than looking right. Support poured in. Headlines hailed his courage. Young people who had tuned out the royals suddenly paid attention. For many, William had become the face of a new kind of monarchy, transparent, human, and driven by purpose. But behind closed doors, the atmosphere was explosive. King Charles, blindsided and enraged, accused William of dividing the family. Camilla, humiliated by the revelations in the will, saw the move as personal. Tensions between father and son intensified. The once unbreakable bond between Charles and William now sat on the edge of collapse. Yet William refused to retreat. He believed the Queen's will was not just a list of gifts, it was a vision. A roadmap to modernize the monarchy without erasing its past. And if honoring her meant walking into the fire, so be it. This wasn't about thrones or titles. It was about a woman who led with quiet strength, and a grandson determined to ensure her voice would echo long after she was gone. And the Queen's last request? It wasn't just about things, it was about who should lead next. Was her will secretly choosing her successor over her own son? For a woman who spent her life cloaked in diplomacy and restraint, Queen Elizabeth II may have delivered her boldest message not through speeches, but through silence, through careful omissions and symbolic gestures buried within the lines of her final testament. No royal decree, no formal bypassing. But what the Queen didn't say spoke volumes. The distribution of her possessions was not random. It was deliberate, precise. Balmoral, the Queen's beloved sanctuary, the place where she found solitude, away from the weight of the crown, was passed not to Charles, but to William. That alone raised eyebrows. Balmoral was more than a property. It was the soul of the royal family, a symbol of stability and history. Entrusting it to William wasn't about inheritance, it was about trust, about continuity, about preparing the next chapter. And then came the jewels. While Camilla had expected to receive pieces that reflected her new position as queen, it was Catherine, the Princess of Wales, who inherited the most significant heirlooms. Necklaces worn during coronations, brooches tied to global diplomacy, rings passed down from sovereign to sovereign. The message was unmistakable. The Queen saw Catherine not just as William's wife, but as the future face of the monarchy. Even more telling were the personal items William received: handwritten letters, private journals, and mementos the Queen had held close for decades. These weren't public gestures. They were quiet choices meant only for those who understood their meaning. According to insiders, the Queen once confided to aides in her final year, "The future lies with them, not with tradition, not with those who simply held titles, but with those who could carry the soul of the crown into the modern world." There was no formal exclusion of Charles in the will, no dramatic rejection, but the balance of inheritance, the spiritual, symbolic, and emotional center of the Queen's legacy shifted unmistakably toward her grandson and his wife. It was as if she had drawn a new royal map. And Charles, despite being king, had been subtly repositioned. To the public, it looked like a mother gently sidelining her own son. To palace insiders, it felt like a quiet revolution, one guided not by rebellion, but by vision. The Queen had always been a master of nuance, and with her final choices, she may have crafted her most daring statement yet. That bloodline alone is not enough. That character defines legacy. And that leadership isn't passed down, it's earned. This was more than a family feud. It was a royal rebirth in motion. And not everyone liked it. They honored her death, but ignored her dying words. In the days after Queen Elizabeth II's passing, King Charles and Camilla stood at the heart of a grieving nation. They wore black, bowed their heads, and thanked the public for their sympathy. But behind closed doors, a different reality was unfolding. A will sealed, sacred, and final sat untouched. Weeks passed. Then, months. The official reading was delayed, again and again, and questions began to rise. Was this hesitation just grief, or something far more calculated? And perhaps that's what makes this moment so haunting. Because beyond the palaces and pageantry lies a deeper question, one the monarchy can no longer ignore. Will her family honor the vision she left behind, or will they rewrite it to fit their own? And now the world watches, as the family she built decides whether to honor her or bury her will with her. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one. Palace insiders began to whisper that it wasn't Charles who was stalling, but Camilla. She had fought for acceptance for decades, and now, having finally been crowned queen, the last thing she wanted was a document surfacing that undermined her status. Those closest to the throne claim Camilla feared the will's contents might diminish her public position, or worse, confirm that even in death, the Queen had never truly embraced her. Charles, torn between loyalty to his mother and devotion to his wife, chose silence. But the silence did more damage than any words ever could. The delay didn't go unnoticed. Tabloids ran wild. Headlines questioned what the king was hiding. Public trust began to crack. And then came the coronation. Camilla was crowned not as queen consort, as many had expected, but simply as queen. It was a move that sparked outrage among traditionalists and fueled suspicions that Camilla and Charles were rewriting royal history to suit their new narrative. Rumors began to swirl of secret efforts inside the palace to reinterpret parts of the will, strategic legal maneuvers meant to soften the blow of the Queen's decisions. Certain items earmarked for specific family members were quietly recategorized as crown property. Others, like personal letters or sentimental gifts, simply went missing. But not everyone within the royal circle was willing to stay quiet. Princess Anne, known for her fierce loyalty to the Queen and unwavering sense of duty, confronted Camilla behind palace walls. What was said remains undisclosed, but sources describe it as icy, blunt, and unforgettable. Anne made it clear her mother's wishes were not suggestions, and while she never made a public scene, her silent support of Prince William grew louder through her actions. She stood beside him during key appearances. Declined events where Camilla was featured prominently. Behind her usual stoicism, a quiet rebellion had begun. The palace tried to project unity, but the cracks were visible. The Queen's final act had exposed an uncomfortable truth. Not all crowns are earned. Not all power is accepted. And not all silence is peace. The tension had reached a boiling point, one the monarchy could no longer mask with ceremonial robes and well-rehearsed smiles. And while the crown sits on Charles's head, it's William who's acting like a king. The Queen ruled for 70 years, but in death, her legacy now hangs by a thread. What was meant to be her final act of unity has left the House of Windsor split at the seams, torn between preserving tradition and embracing the future she quietly envisioned. Her will was not just a document, it was a mirror, reflecting not only her wishes, but the truth she saw in those who would carry the monarchy forward. And what it revealed has shaken the very foundation she spent a lifetime protecting. At the heart of this unfolding storm stands Prince William, once the quiet heir, now the defiant voice of remembrance. While others scrambled to preserve the image of stability, William chose a different path. He chose truth. And in doing so, he has risen as more than just the future king he has become, the soul of the monarchy his grandmother hoped would survive. Through backlash and political resistance, he remained unwavering in his mission to see her wishes respected, even if it meant standing alone. Meanwhile, Camilla's image has begun to fracture under the weight of public opinion. Her silent influence over the will's delay, the swift coronation shift from queen consort to queen, and the perception that she rewrote history in her favor have sparked outrage among royal loyalists. Her rise, long shadowed by controversy, now faces new scrutiny. People are no longer asking if she fits the crown, but whether she ever truly earned it. And Charles? He stands in the most fragile place of all between the woman he loves and the mother who made him king. His attempts to manage both sides have only fueled division. Every move, every hesitation, has been seen as either betrayal or weakness. For the man who waited a lifetime to ascend the throne now finds himself watching it fracture from the inside. His reign began with mourning, but now it teeters on mistrust. The public remains split. Some rally behind William, praising his courage and clarity. Others plead for unity, tired of the turmoil and desperate for the monarchy to evolve without tearing itself apart. But the one voice that remains silent is the one that mattered most, Elizabeth's. She left no speeches, no final interviews, just a will, just a wish.